Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
I'm Jena Brown.
I'm Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers Inc. So we set up our Halloween decorations over the weekend, and like I keep looking out my window because my daughter picked this giant animatronic scarecrow, and it's right outside my office window, and it's windy today. So like every couple of minutes, it just starts doing one of these and like talking, and it's very distracting. So if you hear a weird voice that doesn't, that is not my weird voice, and it's probably the scarecrow.
I have not put
That-
up the 12-foot ghost yet. That maybe this
Oh,
weekend
that's right.
project.
You got one of
Yeah,
those.
I got the 12-foot ghost.
Why is this the trend? Why are giant skeletons and
Because it's
ghosts and
fun.
things
Why do you
like
hate
why did
fun,
this happen?
Kevin?
awesome.
I committed a blasphemy the other day by posting on social media that I realized I don't care about Halloween at all.
Oh,
I don't care
Oh,
about it. Yeah.
that
You're
hurts.
Yeah.
dead to me.
oh,
Yeah. I
this is
don't I don't like the candy. I don't dress in costumes.
What?
I don't want people coming over.
Wow.
It's not my holiday.
I'm gonna
Kevin,
call
51 years
you
the
it took me.
and we're
Took me
gonna
quintessential get
51
off
schedule a
years.
my
meeting
lawn
about
guy.
this,
Yeah,
and
I
I'm
know.
gonna show up at your house.
My whole life I thought I was a Halloween guy, but no, turns out I hate it. So
Do you like to
you
watch
guys can
spooky
have it.
movies though, or no?
No, I don't. I'm not a
Oh,
fan of like I'm not a big horror fan, right?
Mm.
So it's just not, I don't know,
I
it
don't
just
even
doesn't
know who
appeal
you
to me.
are right
so
now.
so
I
what
know.
what's your holiday? Are you like a Groundhog Day
I'm
kind of guy
Thanksgiving.
or
I'm a
Easter?
Thanksgiving guy.
Okay, I can see that.
That's an autumn
You're
holiday.
about
It's
food,
about gratitude and there's a bunch of food and family.
Football.
pumpkin
Yeah.
spice.
And I don't have to, usually don't have it at my house. So I get to go and eat the food and watch the parade and come home and then be by
So
myself, which is my favorite.
do you dress up for Halloween?
No, not really. I mean, we have in the
Yeah.
past. This is my first year of being a bah humbug about Halloween, actually. I just decided. It just because Kara did this thing. We have a plastic skeleton named Sheldon, and she did this little vignette at the end of our dining table, and she went all out. And and I'm not eating candy anymore because of my blood type is Lucky Charms. But I decided there's nothing about this holiday that attracts me anymore, so I gave it up.
I
Gave
see.
up.
So you
Yeah.
had to give up sugar and now you're just angry
Now I'm
at
now I'm
everything else
hangry.
That
who gets to
that's
eat.
what's
Yeah.
really going
All
on.
right. Okay. This
Yeah.
makes more sense now. I will allow it.
I'm gonna
So
send you
my
some
I'm
spicy,
not trying to
salty
say that
pumpkin
no one
seeds. It'll be
else
fine.
can enjoy it. Everyone gets to go enjoy their holiday. It's just
my
I'm
my
the it's not me
my
anymore.
daughter has picked scary Halloween costumes pretty much every year that she's been able to get. Like last year she had this, it was an insanely frightening mask and a hood and like a sickle and a knife and like all this stuff. And this year she picked there's a Disney show called Super Kitties, and it's like literally cats that fight crime. And she picked one of them as her costume, and like we went out and we got her the costume and it's all ready to go. And I guess one of her friends at school said, "Oh, that's silly. You need to do something scary." So my daughter yesterday, she was telling us that she wanted to change her costume, but like my wife and I are like, we don't want her to cave into peer pressure. Like that's what she actually wanted was and she
Yeah.
still wants it. Like she wants to change it just because her friend wanted her to change it. So we're doubling down. So I am officially going as a super kitty, and so is my wife along with our daughter. So
Nice.
I love that.
Yeah.
I
yeah,
need
That's
pictures.
great.
We need
Right.
photo
Yeah.
evidence.
no, there's not going to be any pictures of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Oh, come
Oh,
on.
there will be. Yes, there will.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh
buying
man.
my
All right.
airfare right now.
What is going on in the news?
In the news, first up, this, and I'm going to just pre-warn everybody. This one's a hot button for me. But toxic fandom, Hollywood, how Hollywood is battling fans who are, quote, just out for blood, from social media boot camps to super fan focus groups. So-called toxic fandoms have become a major issue in the entertainment industry as online criticism often escalates into what studios claim is targeted harassment against actors and creative teams involved in high-profile projects. According to these studios, toxic fandoms can target projects with a vengeance, particularly when they feel that a show or film deviates from established canon or challenges the original content in any way. They claim that this backlash often involves review bombing, offensive comments, and sometimes threats of violence, as seen with shows like The Last of Us, House of Dragon, and The Rings of Power. To counter toxic behaviors, some studios avoid directly engaging with negative comments and instead focus on amplifying positive feedback Others have resorted to social media training for talent or even taking over their social media accounts to protect actors from harassment. In some cases, security measures are often taken to scrub sensitive information online when threats escalate. Despite these claims, commenters and influencers online often point out that while accusations of toxic fandom are prolific, there's typically little evidence presented to support the idea, and instead, studios are blaming fans for the failure of programming that is down to poorly written and lacks strong storytelling. That last bit was added by me.
I was like, I didn't put that bullet point in there, Kevin. Where'd that come from?
Because this burns me so much because this is specifically it's about shows like I actually ever actually heard anyone trash talk Last of Us or House of Dragon. Really, Rings of Power is a just poorly written show. It's terrible. This idea though of blaming the fans for your failure is it just makes me want to peel my own skin off. I just can't stand the very concept of it.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the criticism if it were created in a not like really racist or sexist way. And I think like I saw a lot of this. I mean, Star Wars is one of the biggest fandoms out there that is very guilty of this, and they get like really insane with it, and they get like mean and they get super nasty.
But I'm starting to question whether or not all of that is real, because someone got caught faking an account so that they could post a bunch of racist comments about themselves, and I can't remember who that was.
Well,
I wish I'd looked it up before we came on.
Well, and there is that, like, I think they have like determined that Twitter especially like has I mean, it's an outrage machine. Like that's literally what it is. And there was an interesting, I don't know what it was, if it was a study or what, but Threads, when it came out a year ago, you know, everyone wanted to make Threads not Twitter, right? So they were going to make it positive. But they had a really hard time getting interaction and users. And so people started rage baiting. And it's now become such a problem that Meta is like trying to figure out how to stop it, because that's the only way people get interaction. So it's an interesting point that whether it's real or not, but it is out there, and that is the thing that gets people to engage with content, which, I mean, that's a whole different psychological and sociological problem.
That's just the social media problem in general, right? Like people use social outrage for their own celebrity and to get followers. And I don't know, I'm kind of so over social media.
So if that's the case though, I mean, then couldn't you make the argument that that's what these studios are doing by posting?
You know what? I think there's probably both. I think probably both things happen. You know, I'm sure there probably is people who didn't get the content they want, who are trolling actors, but it probably goes the other way too. I think when you get a story like this, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
just my guess.
Read Charlie Jane Anders had a really fascinating analysis in her newsletter, and she said, you know, what the interesting thing about this is that all these like toxic fandom posts can affect a show or movie negatively, but never the other way around. So when you focus on like those super fans and you create a show for the super fans, even if it's like the most superbly well done show or movie ever that satisfies those super fans, rarely do they cross the divide to the general public to make it a success. And I thought, again, I guess going back to like that rage bait, that outrage, like, yeah, you can't positively shift that dynamic. You can only affect it negatively, which is really fascinating to think about.
Yeah,
Well, I think a lot of people feel like they can hide at this point too. You know, like a lot of the comments that they make online, they would never make to somebody's face or in person. But yeah, and that wall online seems to be getting thicker and thicker. Like people will say literally anything, and like Christine said, a lot of it is just to get likes and follows and clicks. Like they will throw whatever they want out there. What I don't get from the Hollywood side is why they buy into it as quickly as they do. Like I followed the release of Colleen Hoover's last movie pretty closely because this happened with it. You know, and there's major abuse factor involved in the storyline and things like that. But they jumped all over it immediately. And Blake Lively, who starred in the movie, like she was basically thinking her career was over, according to some of the stories that were coming out. Like the studio was freaking out, and like they can't see through the BS to the fact that people are literally just posting whatever they can to get their little look at me moment. It may not have anything to do with the actual story. It's more about me instead of what they should really be talking about. And you would think this far into it, like we've all seen it enough, the studio would be able to put up their blinders on and see past it. But I don't think an actor or an actress should be worried about their career just because of some posts on Twitter.
No, and I think like Hollywood's had a major problem though for a long time understanding like what the actual public wants to see. That's why they just keep rechurning the same old, shows and movies. Like they just keep doing remakes instead of, like creatively going after something new.
Well, I can tell you one thing.
I don't think they understand the public. Like, and I think it's like a weird major Hollywood studio problem.
The one factor that really does impact them, and this has changed because of social media, is a movie comes out, let's say Friday, so they have their sneak peek starting on Thursday, and if you go back pre-internet, they could basically ride the weekend. So even if it was a terrible movie, everybody would go to see it that weekend, and then Monday, as people huddled around the water cooler or turned on the news or whatever, then word would start to spread. This movie isn't that great. You don't want to see it. In today's world, that happens, literally after the very first showing, at midnight or whatever on Thursday. And it can tank a movie, before the weekend even starts. And, that could be, 50 to $100 million gone. Like the entire project could be in the red just because of, the trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. I don't want to yell about this one anymore. I'm internally yelling. All right, Authors Guild to promote Created by Humans. The Authors Guild and startup AI rights licensing platform Created by Humans announced a partnership in which the Guild will promote the new service and help make decisions about how to best serve the author community through their platform. The Authors Guild will develop educational resources such as informational materials and webinars to guide authors through the AI rights licensing process. The Guild recently introduced a, quote, human authored badge, allowing others to label their books as fully human created.
Now, is this different than the badge that other author put out?
I don't know.
There's a link. You can click it and go.
But I ain't joining a guild.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not joining anything. I can just put it on my book.
That's helping. Is it an AI company that did the Created by Humans, or is it?
I think it's an AI rights licensing company. So yeah, like if it's created by humans, are you going to license your work for AI use? Is my understanding.
I prefer to think it's an AI created company that is now getting us to put Created by Humans on our books so the AI can profit from it.
I think so. Yeah. So that we can be more readily identified and eliminated is what I think is going to happen. Yeah.
I see. When do you think we're going to see the first T1000? That's the real question.
How do you know we don't already have the first T1000?
Well, I guess that's true.
There you go. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was fooling people into thinking it didn't exist. So yeah, no, I don't know yet enough about this yet. My sort of visceral instinct when it comes to things like this is I'm never rushing out to join any form of guild or whatever.
Will you join my Halloween guild though?
I might. We'll see. Does it require me to do anything? That's my number one rule.
You have to like Halloween.
All right, I'm out.
Dress up like a super kitty.
I'm going this year for Halloween. I'm going as a moderately successful self-published author, and I think it's going to be a hit. Let's get to the last story here. Hardcover joins the We Aren't Goodreads rank from book. This comes from Book Riot. There's a new Goodreads alternative for social reading apps. Hardcover is launching with a freemium model. They aren't doing traditional advertising, and there is an AI recommendation thing built in as well. It's an independent project with no obvious venture or investment backing, which is sometimes done better in the space. Think Library Thing and Storygraph. Goodreads alternatives.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
so
was gonna do Storygraph, and I still haven't even looked at that. So
when Library Thing first came out, I jumped on that and I uploaded, like, here's all the books that I read, and like you could import them from Goodreads. And the problem is, like, they're not Goodreads, and at this point, Goodreads has the audience, and nobody is going to shift over. I checked out the site; it's fantastic. It looks 1,000 times better than Goodreads does, but they don't have that audience. And that's like creating Amazon today and then trying to compete against Amazon. It's a little too late.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't do anything with Goodreads.
That Goodreads just doesn't do the very simple things it could do to just improve itself. And I guess maybe because they have a lock on the market, they don't have to, but I hope that maybe a competitor gives them just enough pressure that they just make themselves better.
But it's owned by Amazon, so that's not going to happen. It does it when there certain companies, once they get to a certain size, they'll acquire these and they just sort of let them. It's not like they're aiming for them to fail or die or wither or whatever. It's just that they get lost in the machinery, I think. And this happened. My personal opinion is that this is what happened with ACX and Audible. ACX to me has been it's gotten better recently, but it was a horrible experience for most of the time that it's existed. And but it still hung on because Amazon was backing it. So they have no incentive, none, to improve these things. They bought it for what it is, and they, as long as it's continuing to work and not getting them a bunch of lawsuits or something, then they're willing to just let it hang there as is.
So that's the history. We just have to get a bunch of people to start suing Goodreads for things.
Let's sue Goodreads. Noted. I'm in. Class action lawsuit.
Join my guild.
Oh, goodness. Join my Sue Goodreads guild? I'm perfect.
The Sue Goodreads. I am a member of the Lollipop Guild.
That's the best one. Yeah.
That's it for news.
JD, who is up this week?
This week, we've got Sydney Graves coming on. Sydney is the pen name of Kate Christensen, the author of 7 novels, and her latest is called The Arizona Triangle. It's a whodunit about loyalty, love, and trauma, and it releases October 22nd. Here she is, Sydney Graves, or Kate Christensen.
This is the first time you've written under a pseudonym. Now, that was, I assume, a market choice, but was it also kind of freeing in a way to write under the name Sydney instead of Kate?
It was actually my choice that happened to jibe with the marketing department. They thought it was a great idea, and so did my editor. But I planned to write a detective series under a pseudonym for decades. And I was, and hitting on the pseudonym was almost more important than hitting on anything else, because the name you write under says so much about who you are as the author. So it isn't by me. This book isn't by me. I don't think of it as a Kate Christensen book. I think of it as a Sydney Graves book. And the choice of a sort of gender fluid first name was deliberate. And I used to hike when I lived in Maine with my friend Jessica Anthony, who's a brilliant novelist, and she came up with the idea of Sydney. I said, I need something interesting. I need something colorful, and I need something that fits Jo, the detective, who also has a sort of, could be male, could be female name, indeterminate name. And it was fun to play with that. So we came up with Sydney, and Graves just followed because Graves.
Sure.
because death.
Right. It's funny as you mentioned that, because I think about how often characters sort of take the story from us and they take us on different paths. So by writing under Sydney, I was thinking, is that a bit more freeing in a way that, a lot of the stuff you've written in the past has been a little bit more literary. Now you have Sydney. It's almost like you are playing a character writing about characters. Did you feel that?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I meant by it's important to know the name that I'm writing under as I write the book. I sort of inhabit a different writerly persona, and that is freeing, and it's really fun. I wrote this book during lockdown, during COVID, and I was writing a literary novel under my own name called Welcome Home, Stranger, and it wasn't working. And I thought, I did food writing for a while, and it was something I also had wanted to do for decades. And you know what? If you want to do something, just do it. I wanted to be a detective novelist, so I wrote a detective novel. And apparently that's how you become something, is you sort of you dress for the job. And so imagining that I was writing under a pseudonym freed me up from the weight of all my previous novels and memoirs and sort of writing and work. And so I could become an Arizona detective just without any baggage, it's a debut novel in a way. Sydney Graves has never published a book before, so it's my first. It's a debut, which is also exciting when you're my age and sort of with the world weary kind of publishing history that I have. It's refreshing to sort of try something new under a new name. Why not?
And you've done, you mentioned like the food-based memoirs, the literary writing, the detective novel. You're writing a YA series right now. Is there space opera here in the future for us? What are we planning next?
Now that you mention it, don't give me any ideas. That's not a bad idea.
But yeah, hopping around the different genres, that must put your editor into fits. But as you say, it's kind of invigorating.
It is invigorating, and it's sort of like feeling like a literary novelist in this sort of climate in the US right now. It's sort of attenuating invisibility. It's sort of a game of like, well, I'm still alive. I'm still writing. They didn't publish my last novel, but there isn't the sense that I had when I was starting out in my literary career of novels being novels being cultural events when they come out. And now it feels like a real sort of, like apocalyptic fight for survival, for the attention of readers. And so writing in genre, and I am writing a YA series for Disney, co-writing with Eliza Wolfe, who is a friend of mine also, which is great. But writing in genre, it's like, I mean, it was the food writing did this for me too. It sort of reinvigorated a sense of what's next. I will write literary novels until I die because I cannot stop.
Right.
And that's what I do. It's all I've ever wanted to do. But having little side gigs and little tributaries off the main river, I feel like it's very it's like going off on a little vacation as a writer. A little adventure.
But what a joy to have a literary author in genre writing, because I do find a lot of genre-specific writing can be quite thin, I'll say. And so when I read something like, I mean, obviously like a Cormac McCarthy or something like with The Road, and The Road is a post-apocalyptic novel, but it's written by a brilliant writer. And it's the sort of thing you read a chapter and then you got to step back and go out, look at the birds in the sky for a little while. But another one comes to mind, like I said, like a Dennis Lehane, something where that's a detective novel, but a brilliant writer. And we don't have quite enough of that sometimes. And so I love the fact that you're taking your literary skills and bringing that into the detective series. But this was a new world for you. So what kind of research did you get to do? Did you get to go out with some detectives? Did you solve some crimes? What did you do?
Okay, so here's what I did. I did not solve any crimes that I know of. I would love to solve crimes. I would love to be a detective. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so attracted to this entire genre. I think detective fiction, it has a long and august sort of literary history. I think it goes back to maybe Dostoevsky, definitely Sherlock Holmes, probably even earlier. But I mean, my interest in detective fiction started when I was a teenager and with Agatha Christie, who's the gateway drug for most of us. And then I devoured series. I love series, and I'm planning for this to be a series. And the series I loved were Sue Grafton, and I wanted Sydney Graves to have her initials, which is a sort of tip of the hat to Kinsey Millhone and that whole alphabet series that I've read now 2 or 3 times, every single one of them, and sort of learned about how to create a world that the detective lives in, a fictionalized Santa Barbara, and a sort of deeper storyline that the detective, against her will, is forced to undergo as she solves. It isn't just purely crime solving, it's also family, it's existential questions, it's romantic and sexual questions. It's a whole tamale of who this detective is. And also Dick Francis. I can't talk about detective fiction without talking about Dick Francis, who's a bit forgotten now, but unjustly so, and I think is one of the greats. And his sort of everyman jockeys, if I can call them that, sort of good guys who are very slight and always on a diet and always denying themselves food, and which interests me as a gourmand. But this whole relationship to the horse world and crime, and he builds this world that he then allows his various detectives to inhabit. So I read my way through like a worm boring its way through rock or something. I don't know what the metaphor is, but I read my way through series after series after series and feeling this imitative urge, as one does as a writer, to do it myself. And it's interesting to me that it took until my 60s for me to actually jump in and start a series. It feels to me like something like a treat that I've sort of put off giving myself, and now I think I'm old enough and I deserve it. But but this first, the Arizona Triangle is meant to be a sort of pilot, like a pilot to a TV show, a pilot to a series. And so it's more atmospheric than plot driven, on purpose, to kind of create the world that I'm going to inhabit, I hope, for a number of books. And I didn't do a lot of research. I'm from Arizona. I've spent a lot of time in southern Arizona in recent years because my mother lives there. And I found myself there a lot. And so I was hiking in the hills around Oracle, Arizona, which is Delphi, loosely. And I was thinking, this would be a great place for a murder.
Now, was that regarding a book or any plans? Somebody you knew in particular? Or?
No, it wasn't me killing anyone. It was, it was like a hypothetical sort of, sure. I wonder, I should set a murder series here. I don't think there is one set here. And in this sort of Tucson, well, I mean, there are a lot of series, there are a lot of detective novels set in Tucson, but in this particular part of southern Arizona, I hadn't seen it written about. And so, it's like lighting your pilot light of your imagination gets lit, and you turn on the burners and it suddenly starts firing. So the research I did was really over the decades, reading other series and getting to know this place really well, because I think series really benefit from a strong sense of place. So that was my primary aim in the first book, was let's create the detective and let's put her in her world, and I gave her an all-female agency, detective agency. Just sort of hinted at it in the first book, but I have plans for them.
And it's funny you mentioned atmosphere. I've got a wide range of stuff I like to read, and I'm not a huge post-apocalyptic person at all, zombies and that. It's just sometimes I like some of the writing. And there's one series that I go back to again and again, and I find that the stuff that I like within this series isn't all the zombies and all that sort of stuff. It's actually the small moments between the characters. Those little moments, like the two of them sitting down and eating catfish for page after page. And I know that sounds boring to somebody who's looking for zombie slashing, but it really are those small moments, like that old line, don't write about the war, write about the kid's sock lying in the street. How much do those little moments matter? Because there certainly was a time where, as a newer author, that I would cut those moments out because I didn't feel they advanced the plot or didn't keep things moving. Now I relish those moments. Do you find the same?
Yes, I do. I've always liked to dwell in those moments. I have to cut them because I dwell so happily
You got to trim it down a
bit. But in this book, I feel like so much of detective fiction is atmosphere, and so much it's also suspense. I mean, you do need suspense, and you need a convincing psychopath at the heart of the crime, and you have to be willing to go into evil. Human evil, which is sort of the bread and butter of detective fiction, because as Hercule Poirot said, I don't approve of murder. Which is one of the great quotes. And I really don't approve of murder, but I'm fascinated by what as a writer, my motto is always let nothing human be foreign to me, which I attribute, I think, to the playwright Terence, who was, olden times. I can't give you a year, but the idea that someone is dead because someone killed them, this rent in the fabric of society, which murder is, which is an unnatural kind of twisted death, and having to inhabit the mind of a detective is really fun. And this gets back to the question, did I solve any crimes, which I know was tongue in cheek and funny, but only in my head. But the idea of the whole relationship I had with Jo as the detective, and feeling like we kind of do the same thing in a way. I mean, writing a novel is creating something out of nothing, and solving a crime is following a trail of clues to an answer. But there's some kind of similarity in the pursuit, I think, and that is doggedly and without compromise, sticking to something in the face of the world doesn't want you to do this. Nobody cares if you write your book. And in fact, the world will conspire to prevent you. And so much of writing is fighting that and saying, no, damn, I'm going to write this book. And look, I'm doing it right now. And so I think, and one of the things I love in detective novels is the red herring, the things that get in the way of solving the crime. And to finally answer your question in this very long-winded way, I find these small moments between characters, like the sort of sparks that generate the energy that keep the detective moving forward. It's all about talking to people. It's all about reading human psychology, which is another thing novelists do. And it's all about watching people for the tell. Are they lying? What do they really mean? People don't really say what they mean. And everyone, and obviously the murderer is doing his best to cover his tracks, the murderer. And so assuming that everyone is covering their tracks and suspecting everyone. And that's one of the pleasures of reading mysteries, I think, is that everyone's a potential murderer. And, we don't really go around in our daily lives thinking that everyone is a potential murderer normally. I mean, I don't think. We're really paranoid.
Depends on where you live, I think.
Well, maybe New Zealand. I don't know. They're pretty wild down there.
Yeah, we're pretty out of control. We're pretty out of control. Auckland can get pretty next level, but for the most part, we've been pretty safe up to this point. It's funny you were talking about with those small moments and the red herrings. Now, do you, as now a detective writer, detective fiction writer, do you insert those little red herrings as you go? Do you go and insert them a little bit later? I ask because I'll give you a real small example. I'm finishing up the 9th book in a series right now. And for the first couple of books, I had something in there, a thread all the way through that, I'll be honest, I didn't know what it was. And I kept writing it. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And it wasn't until the 4th or 5th book, I was like, oh my gosh, I think I know what that is now. And that's an insane way to write, because I've put a lot of faith into something that I'm going to bank on later on. Have you ever done that? Or do you prescribe it, or you just sort of let the characters take over?
Yeah, I mean, aren't you talking about letting the characters take over? Isn't that what that means?
Yeah, but the challenge I had was, so basically there was this numbers station, old school World War I, where there's a broadcast 4, 7, 25, 45. And those were signals that they used to pass across border using radio. And I put this number station in the first 3 books, and I still had no idea why it was in there. And that was pretty nuts. And like I said, I only worked it out later. So that's having a lot of faith in either the subconscious, my characters, or being insane. I don't really know. So I guess what I'm asking is, when you put those red herrings through, do those pop in as you write the story, or is it something when you've got farther down the line, you go, oh, you know what? I should put in the blue motorcycle earlier in the book as it rides by, and I'll insert that later on. Do you find that you insert those in, or do those come sort of organically through the writing?
So much of the writing comes organically. And here's where I confess that I write purely organically. I'm not one of those writers who outlines, or I mean, I knew who did it, and I knew why. And I think that came to me somewhere in the first draft. But I wrote the first draft wanting to write about the disappearance. I wanted to write about female friendship and how complicated it is. But that whole thing that you're talking about of putting something in that you're not aware of until later, I don't know yet, because I've only written 1 book. So I'm really fascinated to hear this, that there are things that I'm putting in that I don't know why. I just want them in the book, and I want them in the series, because I'm building I feel like my next one, which as I'm planning it, is going to be very, very plot driven, to sort of counter the sort of like slow burning atmospheric quality of this first one. So so I'm sort of going back and thinking about, well, I put that in. That's interesting. I can use that. So I wonder how much is instinctive, like you're putting it in, you're putting it in, you're putting it in. But we're very practical, we writers. We don't like to waste things. And so you know in the back of your mind that it's there and you have this. And so maybe in this, what did you say, 4th book or 5th book, you figured out what it is?
4th or 5th book. I was getting a bit nervous.
So your subconscious has been working, chewing on it through like 4 books, and finally, aha, you get the answer. But I mean, that to me is one of the most interesting things about writing, not just detective novels, but writing in general. It's that we don't really know sometimes why we're putting something in a first draft, or even a second draft or third draft, and then all of a sudden, I do things by drafts, and so this book, The Arizona Triangle, sort of came out pretty much as it is now in the first draft. But I did, to answer your question, have to, maybe put something earlier, maybe plant something, or hold off on saying something until a little later. Then you sort of, I guess, I mean, as I understand it, having only written 1, and you're much more of an expert on this genre than I am, so you can tell me, but I feel like it's all to sort of, you're hoodwinking the reader, but to give the reader pleasure, because it's like delaying the answer is a sort of, it's like a cat and mouse game that the writer and the reader are playing, just like the detective and the murderer. And there's a sort of echo that I love in detective fiction, which is, I know I'm going to find out. So I'm in the hands of someone who is going to tell me. And that's the contract you make with a detective novel, is somebody will be dead, or somebody will not all of them have murders, but most of them do. So somebody's going to die, and somebody will have killed them. And then we're going to follow the person who finds out who did it. And that's the formula. And it never fails. It's, I mean, you can have detectives of every walks of life, all kinds of murders, all kinds of structures, all kinds of plots. But that formula is so, why do we love it so much? Why do we keep coming back to it? What makes me want to now be writing these instead of, a quote unquote literary novel? I want this formula. I love it. It's one of the most pleasurable formulas of literature, as far as I'm concerned.
I love that parallel, the idea of the detective and the murderer. And from what I understand, what you're saying is, as a writer and a reader, the writer is then the murderer, and the reader is the detective trying to work it out.
That's exactly right. So you've committed the crime by embedding it in your book, and the reader, as they read, is trying to solve it ahead of the detective. And so exactly. So it's like a meta relationship.
And hopefully this turns into becoming a serial killer or a series.
I mean, like I said, don't give me any ideas.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of newer writers, obviously, that that listen to the podcast. So what does your writing day look like? Do you have a structure to it, or is it fly by the seat of your pants?
I structure my day just like I write a book. I sort of fly by the seat of my pants, and every day is different, but I do have an ironclad rule that I write every day. And so I haven't found any way around that. If I could, I would, because I'm really lazy. But I find that if I don't write every day, I'm very unhappy. And also, if I'm away from a book for 3 days, it shuts me out. It punishes me. It's like a Tamagotchi pet or whatever they're called. They die if you nurture them. You have to feed your book every day.
Right.
And so I live in New Mexico, and I do a lot of hiking, and I have dogs, and I have a social life, and like a lot going on. And so I have to carve out a couple of hours at least every day. And over the years as a writer, I used to be ironclad. It used to be every afternoon between this and this hour, this many words. But as I get older, I find that the habit of discipline becomes automatic. So whenever I give myself those hours in a day, and I have to every 5 days a week, I will work because I know how. But I haven't found any other way to do it. I haven't found that there's a muse. I don't have a muse. I don't know. Do you? Do you?
I can't identify the muse. I think there are voices in my head. And I write down whatever they say, and then and it turns into a book.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do you get into the writing process? Are you someone, do you write the entire first draft and just kind of chuck it out there like I do in a big chunk of clay? That's how you do it? Because I know some writers will write the next day, they'll go and be really proper and edit through their stuff. That's insane to me. I could never do that.
That's insane. That's madness. I don't know. I would never finish a book if I did that. I would just get so hung up on the editing because I love editing. I love revising. And so I think of it as generating a big, lump of clay or whatever you want to call it, like a big block of stuff. And then once you have it, then you know what you have and you can shape it and take away what doesn't belong.
Right. Why did you decide now was the time to write a detective novel? I mean, what was it? I was in lockdown. I want to try something different because, like you said, it had been decades you wanted to do this. Why was this the moment?
Interesting question. I don't know. I mean, where do books come from? This detective came into my mind, and the setting of Southern Arizona was I've never written about Arizona. I'm from Arizona, and never to write about the place where you're from is kind of strange. And I think, I wrote about New York, where I lived for 30 years, 20 years, a long time. I wrote about Maine. I've written about, other places that I make up. But I had never written about Arizona. And there was that moment I told you about it, hiking in the hills out in the foothills of Mount Lemmon, when I thought, this would be a great place for a murder. And that took 5 years, but I was trying to write this novel. It wasn't working. I was like, all right, screw it. I'm putting it aside. I'm going to try something new. I know. How about a murder? How about that murder I thought of 5 years ago? It just sort of, it sat on my head like a cat and wouldn't.
Right. Well, that's great. Like I said, I'd like to read quite wide. And I'm reading a romantasy at the moment, which is very, very popular. And I'm trying to understand the hype and understand if I can learn something from it. She's somewhat of a new writer, young writer, and has had an amazing amount of success early. And when you read it, you can tell that she's a good writer and could one day be great. Do you think some of these, I don't want to say, I'm not being dismissive when I say these TikTok sensations, but do you think that sometimes some young writers that really hit it big fast hit a bit too early? That maybe they don't have time to develop? Because I can't imagine the first couple of books that I wrote, I would feel awful if they would have become hits Because it takes a little bit of a while. I mean, the market drives a lot of this. Does that frustrate you at all, or is it encouraging?
I don't know. I don't even know how to talk about the market. I feel like it's a mystery. It's one of these, it's like economics to me. I don't understand it. I know it exists. I know it's important. And I know that there are forces that I can't see that are larger than I am that shape what happens to my books when they're out in the world. But I've never understood it. But I do think that early success and having too broad an audience robs you of that pleasure of being alone with your work that you never get back. You never get that back. I mean, I loved writing my first novel because nobody cared if I wrote it. Nobody cares if I write any books, but nobody cares if you do or don't. I mean, and so I felt like as a young writer, I being alone with my work was romantic, and it was like a love affair. It was like a secret love affair that I had my book and no one was watching, and I was just, it was me and the words on the page. And once you start publishing and once you have an audience, you've lost that sort of that privacy, that sense of I'm alone with my book and
intimacy. Yeah, sure.
Intimacy, yeah. So I think as a young writer, it really, struggle is good, rejection is good. And I always tell my writing students that the most important thing is to show up and write, because that is the only real pleasure of having a writing career. Everything else is noise, and it's 1-star reviews, and it's disappointing sales, and it's sort of like anxiety about other writers, and all of that is sort of up here on the surface of the ocean, and you need to sink way down to the bottom and just be there.
I learned a lot. As we do, I learned a lot more from the mistakes in those first couple of books as I wrote. And I'm really happy that those are tucked safely in a drawer somewhere. No one can ever read them. And it's almost like a commiserating with the characters in some way, because, that's all. It's just you and them. There's no readers. It's just the two of you. Well, all the best of luck, Kate, as Sydney Graves with the Arizona Triangle. I have saved the most important question for last, though, since you do write about food quite a bit. Is barbecue beef or pork?
Oh my gosh. Can it be? How is it only one?
Well, like my wife will tell me, she's a Texan, and so she'll say it's beef. That's what it is. It's beef.
I do not, as a person who lives in New Mexico, I don't argue with Texans.
No, good idea.
I'm going to say your wife is right.
Yeah, they're armed, so you don't want to do that. Cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time today, Kate.
Thank you. That was fun. I appreciate it.
Okay. I want to know, could you write under a different writer persona? Have you done it? Have you thought about it? Discuss.
I haven't, but I could. I would. It does sound fun. I like the idea of anonymity.
I have a secret pen name that actually does better than I do.
Ooh.
What genre does this secret pen name write?
I'm not saying. I don't give anybody clues.
It's erotica, isn't it, Kevin?
It's not erotica.
It's a romantasy. I knew it. I knew it.
That would explain so much. I love the idea of writing under a pen name and being able to put the book out there and just kind of see what happens with it. But, in today's world, you just can't do that anymore. You've got to have the marketing machine behind it, which means you can't just have a pen name. You have to have social media profiles. Yeah. You've got to go out there and you've got to, do all the interviews. Most authors, like I know very few that try to pretend that they're their pen name in today's world. Like if they come out with a pen name, you go to the website and it will flat out tell you that this is the pen name of so-and-so. Like there's no hiding anymore. Like if you go back to the Stephen King days, like when he went with Richard Bachman, at the time, like he was writing, pretty fast, and he wasn't allowed to put out more than one book a year. So he just went with that. But it was literally as simple as just slapping a, different picture on the back of the book with a cover or a bio. And he went years before people figured that out. So I think the time for that kind of thing has passed. I'm trying something similar to it. I've got, my first book was called Forsaken. In the book, there's an author named Tad McAllister. So I'm working on a sequel to Forsaken, and on the cover, I'm actually going to put my name and Tad McAllister on the cover as the co-author. Just as kind of a little wink to the people that know the story. But that's about as far into that kind of thing as I would go.
I saw you drop that into one. Was it Caller's Game or Forum K? There's a Tad McAllister book in the book.
Oh, his books show up all the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it can be smart though? Like I know that like V.E. Schwab, she uses Victoria Schwab for her middle grade, I think. And so she does it to differentiate to her readers what genre you're getting. And I think other authors have done the same. And I think that's smart. Like if you write, primarily romance and you switch to like a space opera, if you use your normal name, like those romance authors or readers are going to pick it up and be like, what is this? Whereas at least even if you're not hiding it, you're subtly communicating this is going to be something different that I'm doing. So I think it can be a clever way of jumping genres.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think especially if you're writing like erotica romance, that's a very specific fandom. You've dreamed up your erotica name, haven't you? What is it? What's your erotica pen name?
Is that where you take your pet's name and you combine it with like the street you grew up on or something? Is that how that works?
Yeah. So mine
so
would be Norris Diamond.
Hugh Bella Waste.
I would be Eva Briarwood.
Okay.
That's a good one. All right. So Kate said publishing a book has gone from a cultural event to post-apocalyptic survival. What do you think about that?
That is so sadly accurate that I don't even know if I have a commentary about it.
I mean, maybe post-apocalyptic can be exciting. I mean, it's a new and explored frontier. You never know what's going to happen.
It's always been a scramble, right? And now it's just that everything is getting faster and faster. I mean, in my world, I've got all these co-authored titles coming out. So I literally have one coming out a month, starting in November. So like I'm getting interviews starting to get booked, and like we had to create a column for the book that we're going to talk about just to make sure that I'm, actually talking about the correct book when I pop on the podcast. But I enjoy all that stuff, so I'm okay with it.
Wait, you're not bringing your co-authors in on these podcasts?
I'm going to try, and you will all be getting emails from me or my PR person as the dates get closer. And I expect you to completely give up your day job to support these podcasts.
I mean, are you kidding me? The podcasting, that's what I do, man.
Right. Well, yeah, I don't really have a day job. So.
Yeah,
there you go.
Day job. What's day job?
I would be happy to switch the day job to do podcasts, but okay.
No, you like money though. So
I do like money. That's the problem. Fun. That's why I have the day job. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if this is a hot topic, but Dick was like, "Oh, I love it when literary writers switch to genre." And I have feelings about that. I don't know if anyone else has feelings and if we want to discuss this.
Well, I do think that genre fiction often gets a very bad name for bad writing, which I don't think that genre fiction necessarily equals bad writing, but I also think that sometimes they just don't understand that like literary is exactly for like indulgent prose, which is fine, but for genre, plot is king. And so you can't write badly, but your writing does sort of have to disappear to the reader. And I think that those are two different skills that one isn't better than the other. It's like comparing a steak to a vegetable. Like those are completely different food groups. Like they do different things, they provide different nutrients. I don't think that they should be conflated.
I've seen it work with horror, because I think literary with horror just you can get a little wordy sometimes with horror, and it's okay. But literary and like a thriller, that's tough, because all of a sudden all these extra words that you're throwing in there are slowing down your pacing, and they're eating up that white space that you kind of need in order to keep people turning the pages.
Yeah.
So it's got a place for it, but I think, and I think anybody can jump from one to the other. You just have to understand, what it is, who's going to be picking up that book, who's going to read it in the end.
I think you can skew literary in any writing, but you do have to understand how it impacts the pace. But you can leverage that. Like, if you're going to do that in a thriller, then there are moments in thrillers where that's fine because the reader needs a breather too, and you can actually use that to kind of help temper the pace of it. But you definitely wouldn't want, like, your action scenes to be, 18 pages of flowery language before the guy throws a punch. I mean, yeah, that's going to throw everything off.
Yeah.
Well,
I'd read that though.
Like, I don't, maybe slightly controversial here, I guess, Kevin, I'm taking over for you. I don't actually really like literary fiction because it is too indulgent for me. I don't enjoy it. And I think that it's almost harder to write really sharp sentences that, every single word is doing like triple duty. It's oftentimes very good writing in order to do that. And I really like bristle at the fact where it's like a paragraph about clouds is good writing, and that shows like, oh, how wonderful this person is and how fantastic they think about things. Like, I don't care, and I don't want to read it, and I think it's terrible writing because I've forgotten what I'm even supposed to be reading about in the first place.
So let me update my scorecard here. You don't like classic literature and you don't like literary fiction. All right.
But that was my point. That's why that's a hot topic for me. When everyone thinks genre writing is easier, it burns me because I like it's hard, but just in a different way.
It's almost easier to just be like self-indulgent and write about like whatever, come up with 18 synonyms for whatever word you want to talk about for 3 pages. I do not enjoy it. I'm sorry. I'll shut up.
That's okay. I love that. Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about was just when she was talking about small moments between characters. I think Dick brought that up, but she said that small moment is about watching for the tell. And I love that so much.
Yeah.
It's so true in mystery and crime. I think it's true in other genres though, too, like romance. I'm like, that probably applies to all genres.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you use small moments?
I will
do you dwell in them? Tell me about them.
Well, so, Dick had said something about how he was reading post-apocalyptic fiction, and the stuff that drew him in the most was those, like, they're sitting around eating catfish or whatever. I have to say that's true of me too. Like, even like I noticed that about myself back when I was still reading tons of comic books. My favorite comic book stories were always the ones where like the X-Men were having a Thanksgiving dinner. Like there's something about seeing these larger than life characters. Yeah, have you shawarma in the Avengers, right? Yeah, there's something about seeing these like huge, hugely powerful people that have been involved in all these heavy action scenes and everything, taking a moment to be just like me. And that's where I think you can connect strongest to those characters in those scenes, so that you can suspend your disbelief a lot easier, because now you're being carried along with them. You're becoming powerful alongside them. It's like the origin of that power is in those tiny little.
Well, I think that those are the things, like really interesting world building can happen too, because if you think about, like memory, and so like we all have things that we tie to scents and foods and things from our childhood, just a general feeling that we have, and different foods can be very important to different cultures. And so I think sometimes a detail that can get overlooked for a lot of like fancier world building, but I do think, like you said, it is like a far more like very deep and emotional aspect that you can give to a character that resonates really well, more than like the flashy stuff.
Yeah. All right. So we have to sneak those moments in without going literary. Got it.
Right. Exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Jay's already like done. I know how to do that. Let's move on.
I'm waiting, by the way, for us to get to is barbecue beef or pork? And why is it, of course, beef? That's the question I'm waiting
I can't argue from you because you're a Texan. Like we have
learned
Texan, that you don't
and
argue
I'm armed.
with Texans.
I am a Nevadan, and I will argue with a Texan all day long. Why does it have to be beef? I mean, beef barbecue.
I like both of them. I don't know.
Actually, pork as barbecue.
Yeah, I've never been to a barbecue in Texas that didn't include the holy trinity of beef, pork, and chicken. Like
Right.
it's all those things. So
Yeah,
and a lot of times they try to freakishly cram them all together as if they were one beast.
Oh, the
So,
turducken.
yeah, that whole
But with beef and
turducken
pork, what do you call
could
that?
be
Poor beefin?
beefkin or beefkin.
Or beacon.
I guess beef isn't
Yeah.
in that abomination, but yeah, it's probably the
It
most
is if you grew up where I grew up. Beef is in everything,
and beef is in everything.
especially my
For what
mouth.
for what it's worth, my wife was a vegetarian for years, like when I first met her, unless we went someplace that had pork, like barbecue pork. We traveled down south and like she would seek out like, the most, well-known barbecue place, and it was always barbecued pork. And then like she'd be back to tofu and all the other nastiness as soon as we got back home again. So that to me tells me that it is barbecued pork is probably the leader out of those three.
Bacon is the segue meat. I was a vegetarian for a year and
The
bacon did it to
segue
me.
meat.
Yeah.
It's a
The gateway meat.
yeah.
Yeah, I think like I think pork is more, I think when I was thinking about that question, like in kind of all the places, like pork does tend to be more available, I think, as barbecue, but I don't know. That's
Yeah.
fine.
That's because the pig is a magical creature.
But
All right, so
For all of our
homework for this week. You need to write a small moment between characters in a literary fashion talking about pork
There you go.
Or barbecue or arguing
or
about
barbecue.
beef and
Yeah,
pork
we can go with
with
barbecue.
subtext.
And it can't be in the style of My Dinner with Andre because that's too literary.
I don't even know what that is, so it's obviously too
What?
literary for me.
You don't know?
No.
no,
Okay. Well, it's a film that you should watch, except
I
for
don't think I'm
you,
going
Jena.
I will watch it, but I will make you get on a Zoom call so that I can go into excruciating depth over my
Our next podcast, we'll start a whole new podcast. My podcast with Andre.
Oh gosh.
nice.
All right. One last question. Have you ever written something that you were like, what the hell is this about, and left it in the book,
I'm
trusting
so
yourself to
glad
work
you
it
asked
out
this
later?
question. I am so glad I actually wrote that almost word for word this question. So I'm curious to hear everybody's answer before I answer.
I mean, I
I
write
did
serial
it.
fiction, so I don't know what the hell I'm doing half the time. I'm just like, we'll figure this out later.
I did it a lot in 4MK because I had the diary entries and like this kid's mind really wanders and goes off in some really weird places. So like I would just write that kind of stuff, and I took out probably 99% of it. But yeah, there's some very strange scenes that ended up on the cutting room floor that at some point I need to just pick up. I could probably put out just a book of nothing but those because they were fun, they were weird, but
Yeah.
they didn't fit the final story.
I feel like as a pantser, this is what I do by default, though. So, like, I'll introduce some element early in the book, and then when I do my loop back to do the rewrite and edit, I see it and realize, oh, I haven't paid that off, and that's the decision point. Like, either I'm yanking it because I just doesn't work, or I go and create the scenes that pay it off, later in the book. So that's the whole process for me, usually. Jena?
I mean, in draft,
She's busy working on her story about pork.
yeah, right. I know. In my head, I've got 4 paragraphs just on sauce, so that's great. No, I mean, I try to, I guess like sometimes things do end up in there, but yeah, it's like you said, it either changes that I use it throughout the story or it gets deleted. But I try not to leave things in, I try to follow that, like, if this doesn't drive the plot forward or the character arc forward, it's got to go no matter what it is. So I try to follow that. So I don't think it may end up in an early draft or an early outline, but if it doesn't do anything, it's out of there. It's got to go.
Awesome. All right. With that, JD, who is up next week?
Next week, we've got Andrew Child coming back. Together with his brother Lee, Andrew is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Jack Reacher books. Their latest is called In Too Deep and releases October 24th. Andrew Child.
Yeah, always a fun conversation. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, please make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.